The story of ancient Japan begins not with kings or battles, but with water, wind, and stone. Long before temples rose among forests or villages echoed with the songs of harvest festivals, the islands themselves were still being shaped by restless forces beneath the earth. Volcanoes breathed quietly into the sky. Mountains lifted their ridges above the sea, and rivers wandered patiently toward the western Pacific, carrying with them fragments of rock that would become fertile valleys, stretching in a graceful arc for thousands of kilometers. The Japanese archipelago emerged as a world gently separated from the great continents nearby, protected by shifting currents, mist-covered channels, and the endless rhythm of the surrounding ocean. In the earliest mornings, cool fog drifted through cedar forests and wrapped itself around silent hillsides. Waves rolled softly against hidden coves where smooth stones had been, polished by centuries of tides. High above, eagles circled in broad spirals, while distant snow rested peacefully upon volcanic peaks. Every season arrived with quiet certainty. Spring awakened slopes covered in blossoms. Summer cloaked the islands in deep emerald green. Autumn painted valleys in gold and crimson. And winter settled like a patient blanket over mountain villages. Time was measured less by calendars than by the changing scent of the air and the shifting colors of the leaves. The first inhabitants lived close to this ever-changing landscape. Their homes were simple pit dwellings, partially sheltered beneath the earth itself, where thick roofs protected families from rain and cold winds. Smoke from central hearths drifted upward through narrow openings, carrying with it the aroma of roasted fish, chestnuts, and gathered roots. At night, the crackling firelight flickered against wooden beams, while stories passed quietly from one generation to another, blending memory with imagination until the line between history and legend became almost invisible. Life followed the forests and the sea. Hunters tracked deer through moss-covered groves where every footstep sank gently into damp earth. Fishermen watched rivers sparkle beneath morning sunlight, setting woven traps with remarkable patience. Others wandered beneath towering trees in search of mushrooms, nuts, berries, and edible plants that appeared only during certain weeks each year. Their survival depended not on conquering nature, but on understanding it, observing its smallest signals with attentive care. The islands themselves encouraged this harmony. Steep mountains limited broad settlements, while narrow plains near rivers and coastlines became precious spaces where communities gathered, surrounded by water, separated from distant kingdoms by uncertain voyages. These people developed traditions shaped above all by local landscapes. Valleys possessed their own rhythms. Rivers carried their own stories. A single mountain might become the silent guardian of generations who lived beneath its shadow. Rain became one of the most familiar companions. Gentle showers arrived across the seasons, tapping softly against leaves and rooftops before soaking into fields and forests below. The sound of falling water echoed through bamboo groves and cedar branches, creating a melody so constant that it seemed to blend with breathing itself. Mist followed the storms, rolling between ridges until entire villages appeared to float within pale clouds. Over many centuries, gradual change arrived not through sudden upheaval, but through quiet adaptation. New knowledge spread across the islands, bringing the cultivation of wet rice, where rivers slowed across flat plains. People carefully shaped terraces and irrigation channels that reflected the sky like polished mirrors, standing ankle-deep in cool water. Entire communities planted delicate shoots in neat rows, working side by side with deliberate patience. Rice demanded cooperation. Channels had to be maintained, embankments repaired, planting timed with seasonal rains, and harvests gathered before autumn storms. Individual effort slowly intertwined with shared responsibility, encouraging villages to strengthen bonds of trust and mutual care. The landscape itself encouraged collaboration, teaching that prosperity often flowed like water only when many hands guided its course together. Morning sunlight transformed these paddies into shimmering expanses where clouds drifted across the earth as reflections. Frogs called from hidden corners. Dragonflies skimmed silently above the water. The scent of damp soil rose gently into warm air, while distant mountains watched without hurry. Children learned the cycles of planting and harvests before they could fully understand the passing of years, growing into adults whose lives remained closely tied to the turning seasons. Alongside agriculture grew an even deeper appreciation for impermanence. Blossoms flourished brilliantly before falling. Rivers flooded and receded. Storms reshaped coastlines. The moon waxed and waned above quiet villages, reminding observers that beauty often existed precisely because it could not remain unchanged forever. Rather than resisting these cycles, many accepted them with calm reverence, finding comfort in continuity despite constant transformation. Forests retained a sacred presence. Ancient cedars rose like living pillars whose roots reached deep beneath. Layers of fallen needles and soft moss. Wind moved through their branches with whispers that seemed almost like forgotten voices. Travelers entering such groves often slowed their pace instinctively, sensing that silence itself possessed a meaning among trees that had witnessed countless generations. As settlements became more established, careful organization slowly emerged. Leaders earned respect through wisdom, reliability, and the ability to preserve harmony within their communities. Skills passed from elders to younger hands with quiet consistency, shaping tools from stone and wood, weaving baskets, firing clay vessels, preserving food, and reading the signs carried by clouds or migrating birds. Order grew naturally from shared necessity rather than grand ambition. Yet, beneath this peaceful existence, faint seeds of another tradition began taking root, defending fields from conflict, protecting families during uncertain seasons, and maintaining responsibility toward one's community. Nurtured qualities of discipline and vigilance. Courage remained inseparable from service. Strength existed not for conquest, but for preservation. Though centuries would pass before armored warriors rode beneath fluttering banners, the earliest foundations of that spirit could already be found in those who stood watch while neighbors slept or who labored tirelessly, so others might endure winter in safety. Still, such distant futures rested far beyond the horizon. The valleys remained quiet. Evening fires glowed softly. Within earthen homes, as smoke climbed toward darkening skies, crickets sang among grasses beside flooded fields, while owls called gently from hidden branches. One by one, stars emerged above volcanic ridges until the heavens appeared crowded, with silent lights reflected faintly across still water. The ocean continued its endless breathing against the shores, never hurried, never truly still. Moonlight stretched across the waves like a silver path leading into mystery, while cool night air settled over forests, rich with the fragrance of cedar and damp earth. Families drifted into sleep beneath carefully woven roofs, wrapped in the reassuring sounds of insects, wind, and distant streams. Above them all, the constellations watched, unchanged through countless seasons, shining over pristine valleys where mist gathered once more before dawn. In those peaceful hours, ancient Japan seemed less like a place separated by islands than a quiet conversation between mountains, rivers, forests, and sky, a land learning with extraordinary patience that endurance often grows from gentleness, and that even the earliest whispers of history can rest as softly as starlight upon still water. As the centuries passed with the quiet certainty of rivers flowing toward the sea, the scattered villages and fertile valleys of the islands gradually gave rise to something new. The rhythms of planting and harvests continued to guide ordinary lives. Yet beyond the mountains and forests, a center of extraordinary refinement began to emerge. It was an age that would later be remembered for its grace more than its power, for whispered verses more than raised voices, and for the gentle appreciation of beauty that lingered only because it could. Nevertheless, the land itself seemed to exhale as the imperial court settled into a new home, establishing the city of Heian-kyo, the place known today as Kyoto. The new capital rested within a broad basin embraced by distant hills, where streams wandered through, meadows before joining larger rivers that nourished the surrounding countryside. Mornings arrived wrapped in pale mist that drifted between rooftops and temple groves. In spring, cherry blossoms floated upon the breeze like delicate snowflakes, gathering silently along canals and pathways. During autumn, crimson maple leaves descended one by one into quiet gardens, covering smooth stones and moss, with fleeting color before returning gently to the earth. The streets of the capital followed careful plans, broad avenues extending with deliberate order toward palace compounds and noble residences, built almost entirely from wood. Their architecture seemed less intended to conquer nature than to exist within it. Wide verandas opened onto carefully tended courtyards where ponds mirrored the passing clouds, and sliding screens invited fresh air scented with pine, flowering shrubs, and distant rain. At twilight, the soft glow of lanterns reflected across still water until the entire city shimmered with quiet warmth. Within these elegant buildings lived families whose greatest ambitions often revolved around refinement rather than conquest. The rustle of layered silk robes became as familiar as birdsong. Inkstones rested beside finely crafted brushes, waiting patiently for graceful hands to compose poems inspired by changing seasons or moonlit evenings. Conversations unfolded with remarkable gentleness, where carefully chosen words carried more weight than loud declarations. A single verse, written with sincerity and subtlety, might express emotions too profound for ordinary speech. Throughout the halls of the imperial court, incense burned steadily inside carved vessels, releasing fragrant trails that mingled with cool currents drifting through open corridors. Sandalwood, aloeswood, and delicate herbal blends lingered in the air long after gatherings had ended, leaving invisible memories that clung to polished beams and embroidered curtains. Even silence seemed cultivated, treasured as an essential companion to music, painting, and literature. As daylight softened into evening, musicians plucked the quiet strings of zithers, while bamboo flutes carried slow melodies into secluded gardens. The notes floated above ponds where carp traced lazy circles beneath the surface, disturbing reflections of wooden bridges and hanging willow branches somewhere beyond the walls. Unseen crickets welcomed the approaching night, their steady chorus blending almost perfectly with the music of the court. The nobles who wandered these peaceful corridors often sought inspiration in moments so subtle that they could easily escape unnoticed. A blossom landing upon a sleeve, the brief appearance of the full moon between passing clouds, the distant cry of migrating geese crossing the autumn sky. Such experiences awakened a quiet awareness that every beautiful thing was temporary and that its passing gave it greater meaning. This gentle sensitivity later remembered through the idea of mano no aware, infused daily life with a tender melancholy that was never entirely sorrowful, but instead deeply accepting of the world's endless transformations. Messages between companions might arrive as folded sheets adorned with elegant handwriting and accompanied by a branch of seasonal flowers. Replies were expected to carry equal care, blending emotion with literary skill. Reputation often rested not upon wealth alone, but upon the ability to perceive hidden beauty, to recognize the significance of changing light upon distant mountains, or to craft verses that echoed softly within another person's thoughts, long after they had been read. Beyond the palace walls, artisans, gardeners, scribes, and attendants sustained the quiet brilliance of the capital. Skilled hands polished lacquer until it reflected candlelight like still water. Others tended miniature landscapes where stones, moss, and carefully pruned pines recreated the grandeur of distant mountains within secluded courtyards. Weavers transformed threads into robes, whose colors shifted with the seasons, while papermakers prepared, smooth surfaces that would preserve poems for generations yet unborn. For many within Heian-kyo, the outside world felt unimaginably distant. Dense forests enclosed valleys beyond the city, and mountain passes disappeared into mist. News from remote provinces traveled slowly along winding roads, softened by time, before reaching the ears of court officials. The capital itself seemed almost suspended between earth and dream, sheltered within rituals, festivals, and artistic pursuits that unfolded according to ancient calendars rather than sudden events. Summer rains often arrived without warning, drumming softly upon wooden roofs before, cascading from carved eaves into stone-lined channels below. Noble families gathered beneath, covered walkways to watch curtains of water veiled the gardens. When the storms passed, every leaf glistened beneath renewed sunlight, and the scent of damp cedar drifted through the open halls. Children followed dragonflies near lotus ponds, while elders reflected quietly upon verses inspired by the changing sky, far beyond the graceful avenues of Heian-kyo, where silk sleeves brushed polished floors and poems drifted. Through candlelit halls, another rhythm slowly took shape across the mountains and valleys of Japan. It unfolded not with fanfare, but with quiet persistence, carried by travelers on winding roads, by horses climbing mist-covered passes, and by families whose lives were bound to forests, rivers, and distant frontiers. In these rugged provinces, where the capital seemed as remote as a fading dream, the earliest warrior households began to define themselves through patience, vigilance, and unwavering duty. The landscape itself demanded resilience. Jagged ridges rose above narrow paths where ancient cedars clung to steep slopes, their roots gripping stone, worn smooth by centuries of rain. Before sunrise, pale fog drifted through the valleys, softening every outline until mountains appeared like islands floating upon a silent sea of cloud. Dew settled on tall grasses, and spiderwebs, stretched between branches, shimmered briefly before dissolving beneath the first light of dawn. Small settlements rested wherever the terrain permitted, tucked beside rivers or sheltered beneath wooded hills. Their buildings were modest, constructed from timber cut nearby, and roofed with materials gathered from the surrounding land. Smoke rose gently from morning hearths as families prepared simple meals of rice, vegetables, and fish caught in clear mountain streams. Life remained close to the rhythms of the earth, where changing seasons determined both labor and rest. Among these communities lived men and women, entrusted with responsibilities extending beyond their own households. They protected roads, watched over estates, settled disputes, and responded when disorder threatened peaceful villages. Over time, these guardians developed into a distinct class whose identity rested not only on skill, but also on commitment. They would later be remembered as samurai. Yet, in these early generations, their existence remained intertwined with farming fields, caring for horses, and maintaining harmony across isolated regions. Their mornings often began before the sun reached the treetops. Wrapped in cool air, scented with damp earth and pine needles, riders led horses across narrow trails still hidden beneath drifting mist. Hooves pressed softly into rain-darkened soil, producing a steady rhythm that echoed against distant hillsides before fading once more into silence. Breath rose from both horse and rider in pale clouds that vanished almost as soon as they appeared. The horse became more than a companion. It was a trusted partner, capable of traversing forests, crossing rivers, and climbing difficult slopes where carts could never travel. Riders learned to understand subtle movements, responding with balance rather than force. Their connection reflected mutual dependence, shaped by countless hours spent together beneath open skies through summer heat and winter frost alike. Equally important was the bow. Crafted with care from layered materials and requiring remarkable control, it demanded neither haste nor anger. Training unfolded in quiet fields where targets stood among swaying grasses or beneath the edge of woodland clearings. An archer would pause, steady breathing until every unnecessary thought dissolved, then draw the long bow with measured precision. The wood creaked softly, almost whispering in the still morning air, before the arrow flew with graceful certainty toward its mark. This practice became known as the way of the horse and bow, or Kyuba no Michi, an ideal that united mounted skill with disciplined archery. Yet, beneath the visible techniques lay something deeper. True mastery required calmness that could not be disturbed by fear or excitement. The strongest hand remained gentle until action became necessary, and the clearest judgment emerged from a mind undisturbed by needless emotion. Children raised within these provincial households absorbed such lessons gradually. They watched elders repair tack, care for equipment, and offer respect to teachers whose experience had been earned over decades. Discipline revealed itself through repetition rather than spectacle. Every knot tied carefully, every blade maintained diligently, every journey completed despite rain or fatigue became part of an education that valued consistency above sudden brilliance. Nature itself served as an enduring instructor. Swift rivers demonstrated persistence, wearing stone smooth through patient movement rather than violent force. Bamboo bent before strong winds only to rise again unharmed. Snow accumulated silently across fields before melting into streams that nourished new growth. These quiet observations reinforced an understanding that endurance often surpassed raw strength, and that flexibility could preserve what stubbornness might destroy. Although weapons remained essential tools, daily existence contained long stretches of remarkable peace. Warriors spent hours inspecting boundaries, assisting neighbors, or tending crops alongside relatives. They mended fences damaged by storms and guided travelers through unfamiliar terrain. Their authority rested as much upon reliability as martial ability, for trust created stability in distant provinces, where IMPER aerial officials seldom appeared in person. As years passed, expectations surrounding loyalty and obligation deepened. Service to family, local leaders, and inherited responsibilities became guiding principles, shaping conduct in moments both ordinary and extraordinary. Honor was not yet a formal code written in books, but rather an evolving understanding expressed through dependable action, fulfilled promises, and willingness to endure hardship without complaint. Quiet integrity mattered more than public recognition. Autumn brought crisp winds sweeping through mountain passes, carrying the scent of fallen leaves across broad valleys. Riders crossed forests painted in shades of crimson and amber, while flocks of birds traced invisible routes toward warmer coasts. Even during training exercises, moments of stillness interrupted movement. A warrior might pause atop a ridge simply to watch mist lifting from distant rivers, appreciating beauty without allowing it to weaken resolve. Winter settled heavily upon the provinces. Ice formed along shaded streams, while frost silvered stable roofs before sunrise. Horses stamped patiently against the cold, their breaths clouding the air as caretakers brushed thick coats beneath wooden shelters. Fires crackled inside modest halls, where stories of ancestors mingled with practical instruction about responsibility, restraint, and courage. Outside, snow absorbed nearly every sound until entire landscapes seemed wrapped in profound silence. Spring returned with remarkable gentleness. Plum blossoms opened beside rough fences, and mountain trails softened beneath new grass. Training resumed in green meadows where arrows disappeared into straw targets. Surrounded by wild flowers, rivers swelled with melted snow, reflecting skies so clear that the boundary between water and heaven became difficult to distinguish. Every season renewed familiar routines, while quietly reminding those who observed them that permanence belonged to nothing except change itself. When evening finally arrived, work slowed beneath fading light. Campfires burned with steady warmth, sending thin ribbons of smoke upward through cedar branches toward an immense canopy of stars. The fragrance of burning wood mingled with cool night air as conversation softened into thoughtful silence. Horses rested peacefully within nearby stables, occasionally shifting upon straw before becoming still again. Guards took their places along simple wooden gates and earthen walls, not with anxious expectation, but with patient attentiveness. Their watch extended across moonlit fields and dark hills, where only the rustling of leaves disturbed the quiet. Above them, constellations wheeled slowly through the heavens, unchanged by human ambitions below. And so, the early warrior settlements settled into sleep, embraced by mountains, forests, and open skies. Their strength did not arise from fury or conquest, but from discipline practiced in silence, from loyalty carried without display, and from minds trained to remain as steady as the stars that shone through the clear provincial night. Under that gentle moonlight, with campfire embers fading and the horizon calm, the first spirit of the samurai rested peacefully. waiting for history to awaken it. Time, like the tide along Japan's eastern shores, rarely changes direction in a single dramatic instant. More often, it turns with quiet persistence, one wave following another, until the coastline itself has been reshaped. So it was during the final years of the 12th century, when the elegant certainties of the old, courtly world slowly gave way to a new order, forged in distant provinces, across valleys wrapped in morning mist and along roads lined with ancient pines. People sensed that history itself was breathing differently, though few could yet imagine where its patient current would lead. The great families who had once served the imperial court with unwavering devotion had grown into powerful clans whose influence extended far beyond Kyoto's refined gardens. Among them, two names echoed through the islands with increasing gravity: the Taira and the Minamoto. Their rivalry unfolded across mountains, rivers, and coastlines, drawing warriors from remote estates and quiet villages into events that would determine the future of the realm. Yet even amid uncertainty, nature continued its timeless rhythms. Plum blossoms opened in sheltered courtyards, streams carried fallen leaves toward the sea, and the moon rose faithfully over landscapes untouched by human ambition. The years of conflict that later became known as the Genpei War arrived like gathering clouds before a long-awaited storm. Messengers traveled narrow paths through cedar forests where their horses disturbed only drifting fog. Campfires glowed beneath towering trees as travelers rested in silence, listening to the distant calls of owls and the steady murmur of unseen rivers. Armor was inspected carefully beneath lantern light, each iron plate reflecting faint flickers that danced like stars upon still water. For those who lived through these years, waiting often occupied more hours than action. Warriors watched valleys from wooded ridges while cool winds moved through tall grasses below. Families remained behind sturdy gates, tending fields and praying that harvests might continue despite uncertain times. Temples welcomed weary travelers with bowls of warm food and moments of quiet reflection, their bells sounding across mist-covered hills with deep, measured tones that lingered long after each strike had faded into silence. The struggle itself reached from inland plains to the sea, where ships drifted beneath gray skies and waves rolled tirelessly toward rocky shores. Along the coasts, salt air mixed with the scent of damp pine forests, while seabirds circled above cliffs worn smooth by centuries of wind. The ocean remained indifferent to human victories or defeats, breathing with ancient patience through every season, reminding all who gazed upon it that even the greatest contests were brief against the measure of time. As fortunes shifted, the influence of the Terra gradually receded, like evening light withdrawing from mountain slopes after sunset. Rising in its place was Minamoto no Yoritomo, a figure whose authority rested not only upon battlefield success, but also upon his vision for lasting order. His path led away from the ceremonial heart of Kyoto and toward a quieter place On the eastern coast, where mountains embraced the sea and natural defenses offered both security and solitude, that place was Kamakura, nestled between wooded hills and the broad Pacific Ocean. Kamakura possessed a character very different from the elegant avenues of the imperial capital. Here, steep ridges sheltered narrow valleys where temples rested, among bamboo groves and pines bent gently toward the wind. Beaches stretched beneath open skies, their sands marked only by the retreating tide and the occasional footprints of fishermen greeting the dawn. Gray waves crashed rhythmically against weathered rocks before slipping back into deeper water, repeating their endless conversation with the shore. Morning mist often drifted inland from the sea, winding through ravines until shrines, pathways appeared suspended within pale clouds. The air carried the mingled scents of salt, cedar, and damp earth, while distant gulls called across the surf. Travelers approaching Kamakura found not an extravagant court, but a place of disciplined purpose, where wooden residences, administrative halls, and temples coexisted within a landscape that encouraged humility rather than excess. When Yoritomo established the first shogunate there, a profound transformation quietly settled over Japan. Political authority increasingly shifted toward military leadership, creating a new balance between imperial tradition and the practical governance of the warrior class. It was not merely the founding of another city, but the beginning of an era in which discipline, loyalty, and regional responsibility would shape the nation's future for centuries to come. Yet the transition itself unfolded with remarkable stillness. Roads that had once carried anxious riders gradually welcomed merchants and pilgrims again. Farmers returned full attention to flooded rice fields, reflecting passing clouds. Blacksmiths resumed forging plows alongside swords, while fishermen cast their nets into calm bays, illuminated by the pale glow of early morning. The sounds of rebuilding proved gentler than the echoes of conflict they replaced. Within Kamakura, temples multiplied among wooded slopes, their roofs emerging from morning fog like quiet islands above a silver sea. Monks swept stone paths before sunrise, leaving delicate patterns in damp gravel that vanished with the next rainfall. The distant tolling of bronze bells drifted through valleys, mingling with wind, moving softly through pine branches and bamboo leaves. Visitors paused instinctively upon hearing these sounds, as though reminded to match the measured pace of the world around them. Even warriors found themselves shaped by this atmosphere. Armor rested carefully upon wooden stands after long journeys, its cold iron surfaces catching strands of moonlight filtering through open shutters. Helmets and bows remained ready when needed, yet many evenings were spent in conversation, reflection, or quiet observation of waves breaking beyond the cliffs. Strength revealed itself not through constant action, but through restraint, patience, and readiness maintained without agitation. As seasons passed, Kamakura settled comfortably into its new role. Summer storms rolled in from the Pacific, drenching forests before sunlight returned to glitter across wet leaves. Autumn painted the surrounding hills in bronze and scarlet, while winter cloaked temple stairways with frost that sparkled beneath pale dawn skies. Spring arrived with blossoms carried inland by gentle breezes from the coast, scattering petals across shrines, streams, and silent courtyards alike. Slowly, the memory of upheaval softened. The old age did not disappear entirely, for its poetry, rituals, and traditions continue to live within the hearts of many. Instead, it blended with the disciplined ideals of the emerging warrior government, creating a society where elegance and resolve existed side by side, each tempering the other, like water cooling newly forged steel. When evening descended upon Kamakura, lanterns glowed softly within wooden halls, while fishermen secured their boats. Against quiet tides, the wind swept across empty beaches, tracing invisible patterns through the sand before disappearing toward the mountains. Pine trees whispered beneath a rising moon, and from distant temples came the lonely sound of bells marking another peaceful night. The Pacific Ocean continued its endless breathing against the rocky coast. Wave after measured wave, beneath a sky scattered with brilliant stars. Smoke from cooking fires drifted upward before dissolving into darkness. Monasteries high in the hills surrendered to sleep, their hidden roofs barely visible among shadowed cedars. Along silent roads, sentries watched the horizon with calm attention, hearing only the sea and the wind. And beneath that immense canopy of constellations, the new capital of the samurai rested in profound stillness. The storms of history had passed, leaving behind not emptiness, but quiet order, where mountains guarded the valleys, the ocean guarded the shore, and the patient night embraced Kamakura until the first light of another dawn. As the years unfolded across the islands of Japan, another quiet transformation took root, one that could not be measured by shifting borders or changing rulers. It arrived without the sound of marching feet or the clash of steel, settling instead into secluded monasteries, hidden among cedar forests and mountain ridges wrapped in cloud. There, where streams slipped over polished stones and bamboo leaned gently in the wind, many warriors began to discover that true mastery was found not in victory over others, but in understanding the stillness within themselves. The roads leading to these temples wound upward, through valleys where moss covered, ancient walls and tree roots embraced forgotten stairways. Morning mist drifted between the trunks of towering cedars, softening every outline until earth and sky seemed to dissolve into one another. Travelers climbed slowly, hearing little beyond the quiet call of distant birds and the patient murmur of water flowing unseen. Through shaded ravines, each step became part of a rhythm older than memory, inviting the mind to grow lighter as the mountain path rose higher. Within monastery grounds, silence was never empty. It possessed texture and depth, filled by the faint rustling of leaves, the whisper of robes across wooden floors, and the occasional ringing of a bell whose single note lingered in the cool air long after its source had become still. Even the smallest sound seemed to reveal the vastness surrounding it. A solitary drop of water falling into a weathered stone basin echoed softly through a courtyard, expanding into gentle circles before disappearing without resistance. Warriors who entered these places often left behind the urgency of roads and responsibilities. For a brief while, their swords remained nearby, yet their attention shifted toward quieter disciplines. Sitting motionless before open gardens, they learned to observe thoughts as they drifted through. The mind, like clouds, crossing distant mountains, never needing to be chased or held, patience became an invisible companion, teaching that calm could arise not from controlling the world, but from resting peacefully within it. One of the purest expressions of this philosophy appeared in the dry, landscape gardens known today as Karasan-sui. At first glance, they seemed almost empty, composed of carefully placed stones surrounded by pale gravel. Yet, with patient observation, another world emerged. Great rocks suggested rugged mountain peaks, rising above morning fog. Smooth expanses of meticulously raked sand became vast oceans or quiet rivers whose currents existed only within imagination. The garden changed without changing, offering endless journeys while remaining perfectly still. Each morning, a monk might carry a simple wooden rake across the gravel, drawing long parallel lines that curved gently around the stones. The movement unfolded without haste. Every stroke followed the last with measured grace, leaving delicate patterns that resembled waves circling. Lonely islands beneath an unseen moon. A breeze might later soften these marks, and rain would erase them entirely, only for fresh designs to appear with the next sunrise. Beauty existed not because it endured forever, but because it accepted impermanence with quiet dignity. Nearby, patches of emerald moss embraced old rocks worn smooth by countless seasons. Tiny ferns emerged from shaded corners where moisture lingered longest. Fallen leaves rested undisturbed until wind carried them elsewhere. Nothing sought perfection in the polished sets. Instead, weathered surfaces, subtle asymmetry, and gentle signs of age invited appreciation for what later generations would call wabi-sabi, the quiet beauty found in simplicity, in completeness, and the graceful passage of time. This same spirit infused the tea ceremony, where ordinary actions became extraordinary through complete attention. In modest rooms overlooking gardens or forests, hosts prepared utensils with deliberate care. A cast-iron kettle rested above glowing coals, releasing thin streams of steam that curled upward before dissolving into cool air. The fragrance of fresh tea mingled with cedar walls and woven tatami mats, creating an atmosphere where conversation naturally softened into thoughtful silence. Every gesture unfolded slowly. Water was lifted with measured precision. Powdered tea met the bowl without excess. The whisk moved in calm circles until a delicate surface formed, reflecting nearby lantern light with quiet warmth. Hands received the vessel respectfully, pausing to admire its shape before drinking. Nothing was hurried because nothing needed to be. The ceremony transformed an everyday act into a meditation upon gratitude, presence, and shared humanity. For many members of the warrior class, such practices offered balance against lives shaped by responsibility and uncertainty. Discipline remained essential, yet it was no longer directed solely outward. The greatest challenge became cultivating clarity amid changing circumstances, responding without needless anger, and meeting each dawn with an undisturbed mind. Strength expressed through restraint proved more enduring than strength displayed through force alone. As evening descended upon mountain monasteries, lanterns illuminated narrow corridors with golden light that barely reached the surrounding darkness. Bamboo groves swayed gently beyond wooden gates, their hollow stems clicking together whenever the wind wandered through. Somewhere in the distance, an unseen stream continued its endless journey downhill, carrying reflected starlight toward valleys far below. Midnight brought an even deeper stillness. Snow might settle silently upon roof tiles in winter, or summer insects might maintain their quiet chorus beneath broad leaves. Yet, above every seasonal sound, rested a profound silence that seemed almost tangible, embracing temples, forests, and sleeping villages alike. Within meditation halls, candles burned low until only faint embers remained, while outside the mountains stood motionless beneath the moon. In those hours, distinctions between monk and warrior seemed to fade. Both sought steadiness of spirit. Both learned from patient observation. Both discovered that a clear pool reflects the sky only when undisturbed, just as a peaceful mind perceives the world most completely when freed from unnecessary turmoil. Their lessons echoed those learned centuries earlier by farmers reading the seasons and poets, watching blossoms fall, revealing an unbroken thread woven through the history of the islands. The story, having wandered from prehistoric forests to elegant courts, from rugged frontiers to seaside capitals, now returned quietly to where it had always begun, the land itself. Mountains continued to cradle hidden valleys. Rivers traced familiar paths toward the ocean. Mist drifted across rice fields at dawn, just as it had for countless generations, while waves breathed steadily against distant shores, without concern for the rise or passing of kingdoms. One final lantern flickered within a secluded temple before its flame surrendered gently to darkness. The scent of warm tea lingered for a moment, then dissolved into the cool night air. A single breeze whispered through bamboo leaves, crossed silent stone gardens, and wandered into cedar forests where moss softened every fallen branch. Above it all, the stars remained unchanged, shining over volcanoes, villages, monasteries, castles, and quiet coastlines, with the same patient light that had guided the earliest inhabitants of the archipelago. Under that eternal sky, ancient Japan settled into profound rest. The wind became softer still. The forests grew silent. The ocean continued its slow and endless breathing. And wrapped in moonlight, memory, and peace, The whole land seemed to fall asleep beneath the unchanging heavens, waiting serenely for another dawn that would arrive, as always, in perfect silence.